Every few years, a video will go viral of a parliament somewhere in the world that's turned absolutely bonkers. You might recall this scuffle from South Korea, this one from Turkey, Bolivia, Ukraine. I think we're drawn to this kind of footage for two reasons. First, it's always fun to see fully grown men in suits acting like infants. It's what Monty Python built their entire career on. Second, this kind of chaotic scene reminds us that whatever farce our own politics may have descended into at any given time, the situation could always be a lot worse. In the main, the UK Parliament at Westminster is a pretty stuffy, slow-moving place, but every Wednesday lunchtime, all sides get together and put on a pantomime they call Prime Minister's Questions.
The Scottish Nationalist Party consistently talks...
Order, Miss Cherry, this is very unseemly heckling. You are a distinguished QC. You wouldn't behave like that in the Scottish courts. You'd be chucked out. Prime Minister.
The question is, in a world where people's faith in traditional politics is increasingly fragile and the media bombard us daily with doom-mongery proclamations of the dangers threatening our very existence, is there really still a place in 21st century politics for this sort of monkeying around? I'm always reading that we live in divisive or polarised times, as if we didn't design our politics that way in the first place. In the UK, it's only quite recently that the traditional two-party system, a strong, stable government and robust opposition, has come under any kind of real strain. The House of Commons, the green-seated lower house full of men and women the British electorate actually voted for, is set up for exactly that dynamic, one side facing the other, left versus right, a long table and dispatch box between them. It's a confrontational setting and as such breeds a confrontational mindset. I guess its architects envisaged two noble galleons broadsiding each other, whereas in reality on a Wednesday at noon it's more like a gladiatorial arena, only with the gladiators replaced by pasty-skinned middle-aged squares, armed to the teeth not with swords and spears but zingers like...
Half the country think that he's Bert from the Muppets because they think he belongs in Sesame Street, not Downing Street.
The House has noticed the Prime Minister's remarkable transformation in the last few weeks from Stalin to Mr. Bean.
So, how did we get here in the first place? Well, British Prime Ministers have been answering questions in Parliament for centuries, but fixed time slots date back to 1881 and the election of William Gladstone. Out of respect for the 72-year-old Prime Minister, questions to him were put as the last item on the agenda of the day, allowing him to come to work later. PMQs began formally in 1961 under the Conservative Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, who answered questions in two 15-minute slots on Tuesdays and Thursdays. To begin with, these sessions were genteel, respectful affairs. Then came a second Harold Wilson, and opposition leader Edward Heath, who had real beef, and affairs in the chamber began to heat up. Margaret Thatcher began the trend of answering questions herself rather than redirecting them to ministers in her cabinet, and yes, whoever Maggie faced, she usually crushed. In 1997, Tony Blair combined the two PMQ sessions into one half-an-hour slot on a Wednesday. The leader of the opposition now gets 6 questions to ask, and the leader of the third largest party, the SNP right now, gets 2. This is how it works. Backbench MPs enter their names onto the order paper. These are shuffled and drawn in a ballot to be called by the Speaker. That's the referee, by the way, who sits in a big chair like a tennis umpire, keeping everything in. It's usually a he, calls out the questioners' names in alternating fashion. One MP from the government side, one from the opposition benches.
Do the decent thing. Call a general election.
Of course, there are strong arguments for having a weekly Q&A. It certainly keeps the PM on their toes, having to be across all government business rather than just a handful of issues. It's also good for getting politicians to actually come to work. Here's what the chamber usually looks like, which is itself a lot livelier than the upper house, the Lords, which in its typical morgue-like state makes the Commons look like Ibiza in the 1990s. It's also occasionally dramatic. Here's some very low quality footage of Tony Blair getting attacked by some mauve flower-filled condoms. And yet for every flying missile there is a downside. Since PMQs was first filmed in 1989 and shown live in 1990, it's given rise to the dominance of the soundbite in British politics, the tabloid-ready turn of phrase that barely brushes the surface of any real issue being discussed. As a result, the format encourages cheap point scoring rather than actual debate. It's also seen a dash of bullying / casual sexism as well.
Calm down, dear. Calm down.
Did I mention the bad jokes? All the bad jokes, each of them greeted with hails of laughter, knee slapping. Jesus, the jokes.
She dresses in accordance with wherever she goes. She wears a helmet to a building site, wears Indian clothes to Indian parts of her constituency. Presumably when she goes to a cabinet meeting, she dresses as a clown.
Although I'm loath to admit it, PMQs does still play a valuable role in keeping our politicians accountable. There isn't a party leader in the last 50 years who hasn't hated doing them, which is always a good sign, and most admit grudgingly that the weekly back and forth is a unique opportunity to test the party in power. Take the late Liberal Democrat leader Charles Kennedy, who said, "What may seem flat or drowned out in the chamber can come over as the sole sane voice in the asylum to the real world outside watching on television." A senior cabinet minister approached me and said, "You're asking the questions half the cabinet would love to ask, but can't." Tony Blair, like Thatcher before him, regularly dominated the session and wrote in his memoirs that PMQs was the most nerve-wracking, discombobulating, nail-biting, bowel-moving, terror-inspiring, courage-draining experience in my prime ministerial life, without question. Ultimately then, we probably do need the weekly pantomime of PMQs in the UK. Oh, they're sure to make us cringe, but without them, the sound of crickets would set in. They provide a focal point for the Westminster week and bring undeniable vitality to the usually dry and unengaging business of running the country. Without PMQs and the filmed record it gives us, there'd be even more fake news in circulation, and best of all, when clips of our politicians acting like children go viral, they remind us all that elected officials are, ultimately, just like us, that is, fumbling idiots with no real clue what we're doing, making the best of it, trying not to get blamed for catastrophes, trying to make our mates laugh and our enemies look stupid. Finally, PMQs brings everyone down to earth, where we all have to live, where we all pretend to know more than we do and scrabble desperately not to get found out.
When I say the minister's finished, let him be clear. Look at him sitting there shrugging. When I say he's finished, he's finished.
Yes, it was really fun making that video. Thank you for watching my third video on the Earth to Submission channel. Please subscribe for weekly essays on movies, on music, on comedy, on politics, and hopefully see you next week.